Peng Zhaochang has taught at Rollins College in the US before he went back to China, and he's now working at Fudan University in Shanghai. He received his Ph.D. from the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where his chief supervisor was, there seems to be some interruption there. Are we all right? Yeah, his...
I just muted that person.
Yeah, his supervisor was David Kotz. Okay, over to you, Peng.
Okay, thank you very much, Jenny. I believe this new book by Gabriel and Jabur is a very meaningful attempt to try to explain the nature and try to understand the future trajectory of Chinese economy. Of course, in their book, they also discussed Laos and the Vietnamese economy, but since I am particularly familiar with the Chinese economy, so I will just focus on my thoughts on the nature and the future direction of the Chinese economy. My discussion is divided into two aspects. First, I like to emphasize one particular element of the Chinese political economy, which is the leading role of politics represented by the Chinese Communist Party in keeping the socialist nature of the Chinese political economy. Number two, I would like to discuss some of the challenges that China is still facing in order to keep Chinese economy onto the socialist track. I will particularly use the current anti-COVID-19 battle in Shanghai, because I'm now right in the middle of Shanghai, being kept within our neighborhood. Okay, so first, I would like to emphasize that even though we are discussing Chinese economic development, we have to understand that both from the point of view of Chinese ancient history and from the point of view of how socialist revolution started in China, we have to remind ourselves of Lenin's famous saying, that is, politics is concentrated economics. From the point of view of Chinese ancient history, China has never had any social and economic formation that can be called market-centered or commodity-centered. We know that in ancient Greece, particularly in ancient Athens and ancient Roman Republic and Empire, that was in the ancient classic slavery period, and in the Mediterranean area, there was it's an economy dominated by market exchanges. But in roughly the same period in China, around the period of Qin Shi Huang's unification of China, Chinese economy was already represented by the state's strong intervention and domination of the private sector. Yes, China had a rampant private sector 2,000 years ago at that time. However, the state kept strong intervention and control of the private sector. That was very different from the market-centered slavery period in ancient Greece and Roman Empire and Republican Empire. And in the modern period, in the early modern and modern period, China also had significant differences from the Western civilization. In the early modern period, the market-centered, market-oriented economy re-emerged. This time, the dominant form was a capitalist mode of production instead of slavery mode of production. But as Marx commented in various manuscripts of Capital and the Three Volumes of Capital, what unified slavery and capitalist mode of production was market changes. Marx even used the term, even used the word capital in the context of ancient slavery, collective slavery. But in China, if we look at modern, early modern and modern China, again, in contrast to the secondary emergence of market-centered economy, this time called capitalism in the West, in China, we only saw some early penetration of capitalism into the Chinese natural economy. But quickly, the Chinese Communist Party, influenced by October Revolution in Russia, started to be formed in 1921. And so if you look at, this is another interesting contrast between China and the West. In the West, the early modern capitalist revolution happened first, and then various bourgeois political parties became formed. But in China, it's the Communist Party that was formed first, and then it led China to launch a revolution. First, a new democratic revolution, and then socialist revolution. So from the very beginning, the Chinese socialist project was a top-down project led by a political party called Chinese Communist Party. So I'm trying to understand why in Soviet Union, after Gorbachev's political reform started, Soviet Union gave up the socialist mode of production, where China was able to change its development path onto opening, market reform and opening, but still keeping basic state-owned means of production and land, public ownership of land, both in rural and urban China, allowing some foreign capital and domestic market forces. So why socialist trajectory was given up in Soviet Union but kept in China? I would say this historical legacy couldn't be ignored. And currently, as we all know, President Xi Jinping, after he took power in 2012, he has kept emphasizing the need for strengthening ideological education in universities. The largest department in China right now is not the traditional disciplines. It is the school of Marxism. School of Marxism has spread to all kinds of levels of Chinese universities. No university in China right now cannot exist without having a school of Marxism. This is a top-down administrative order. So this shows that a Chinese Communist Party has the intention to keep Marxist ideological control of society. Xi Jinping also has somewhat what we can call a partial comeback to the Maoist type, but it's still in the middle of it. We know that China has different types of mode of production. The socialist one does exist, but in the private sector, capitalist mode of production also exists. And if you look at the relative shares of the two modes of production, it can hardly be said that the public sector overweighs the private sector. Instead, if you look at the percentage of total employment and the number of enterprises, the private sector certainly outweighs the public sector. So to what extent can we say in China, the social and economic formation is still socialist? I think even though you can say that the Chinese state-owned enterprises, they occupy the key strategic sectors, but in terms of the percentage of employment, etc., it's still smaller than that of private sector. So the strongest evidence, I think, is it lies in politics. Still, we have to come back to the point I want to emphasize: politics. Politics is deciding China's future. As long as Chinese Communist Party would like to uphold its dominance of the Chinese society, it will have to rely upon a strong public sector, and also relies upon the lower and the middle social classes to uphold its social legitimacy, political legitimacy. And I think the current the heightened conflicts between China and the U.S. certainly has lent strong help to that purpose. For example, Chinese Communist Party is continuing to reminding itself of the lessons of the demise of the Soviet Union. If Chinese economic system is going in the capitalist way, what would be the legitimacy for the Chinese Communist Party to stay in power? So the precondition for Chinese Communist Party to still enjoy legitimacy in the eyes of Chinese people is to keep the economy a socialist one, a socialist formation. It could allow private sector and private capital to even prosper in some way in Chinese economy. However, it is always up to the Chinese Communist Party and up to politics to decide on the future of the private sector. Just like the market reforms and opening up was a policy initiated by the Communist Party in the top-down way. So I think my first point is, what can we say that Chinese economy could be a market socialist one into the future? And we have to look to the Chinese Communist Party's efforts to sustain its legitimacy, and the U.S.-China conflict will only help with that purpose. My second point is that even though we could find it hopeful that China will remain to be a market socialist one, we have to look very seriously at some of the challenges. For example, the current battle between the pro-socialist forces and the pro-capitalist forces in Shanghai, centered upon whether the central government's policy to dynamically eliminate COVID-19. Why is because I'm now being affected by this battle. It's already 2 months, but Shanghai is still in the middle of this.
Sorry, Peng, I have accidentally muted you when I was trying to mute somebody else. Could you please unmute yourself?
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that. Okay, so Radhika, could you remind me how many seconds ago?
Yeah, just 2 or 3 seconds before.
Okay, no problem. Okay, sure. So in Shanghai, we have already undergone 2 months of quarantine inside our own neighborhood. I have been thinking about why it is so hard for China to struggle against COVID-19. Because we all know that in the past 2 years, the Chinese government has been boasting of the socialist institutional advantage against the West, where the West has chosen to open up various markets where China was able to successfully eliminate COVID-19. But the battle in Shanghai and in other cities in the past 2 months changes the whole picture presented to people outside of China. So I think it is not because of the failure of Chinese institutional advantage. It is because the Chinese socialist institutional advantage has not been realized in the actual practice in Shanghai, and this is because I would say primarily because the strong influence of private sector or capitalist model production in Shanghai. We know Shanghai is one of the most opening up cities in China, and the various leaders in Shanghai actually has relied upon the private sector to carry out various public projects as well. So they do not, the public officials in Shanghai, they lack the classic Marxist sense of planning abilities to organize the people to come into the battle against COVID-19. So if we think about what Lenin did in the new economic policy period between 1921 and 1923, Lenin reminded the Soviet Russian Communist Party members that this is a strategic retreat from classical socialism, and the purpose of new economic policy is not to give the upper hand to capitalism, but to give the opportunity to the officials, Communist Party officials in Soviet Russia, to try to learn from the capitalist enterprises, to learn how to organize a planning system. This is some of the skills that they must achieve in order to advance into a more classic planning period. However, in Shanghai, I don't think in the past 1 or 2 decades, the public officials they have this consciousness. They simply allow the private sector to expand, and what their task is just to try to rely on them to achieve some of the economic development tasks. So in this case of Shanghai's battle against COVID-19, yes, Communist Party is still in control. However, economically speaking, they are not learning the skills of how to transition from the market-centered period to a future planning period, or what we can call, borrowing the authors of this new book, the new projectment period. I do think that the term "a new projectment economy" is a brilliant term. It tells us what the future difference could be between the Chinese socialist economy and the Western economy. However, in reality, I think we still face significant challenges to make that realized, in Chinese practice. So what I want to say finally is that the battle between socialist mode of production and capitalist mode of production, and the purpose to uphold the socialist nature of the social and economic formation, still faces huge challenge. Okay, thank you very much.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.